Legends of floating cities appear in every corner of the world. This video takes you on a journey through 50 of these incredible accounts. You will discover a hidden history of humanity's most persistent and fascinating dream. We will explore sunken kingdoms described by Plato and golden cities that soared through ancient Indian skies. We will question if a phantom island off the coast of Ireland was merely a mirage. And we will see how a real-world monastery built on towering pillars inspired tales of realms suspended in air. By the end, you will see our world's history through an entirely new lens. What forgotten truth do you believe lies at the heart of these enduring stories? Our journey begins not with a myth, but with a detailed account from one of history's greatest philosophers. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes a formidable civilization called Atlantis. He paints a picture of an island nation of immense power and sophistication, existing around 9,000 years before his own time. Its capital city was an architectural marvel built from a series of concentric rings. At its heart stood a central island surrounded by alternating circles of water and land connected by bridges and tunnels. To an observer from the sea, this intricate arrangement of land surrounded by wide, navigable canals could easily have given the illusion of a city floating upon the water. Plato details its advanced engineering, including hot and cold springs, and a system to harness the power of the earth itself. This was a society of immense wealth, with walls plated in precious metals and a culture that eventually succumbed to arrogance. According to the story, the gods, displeased by their corruption, sent a single day and night of terrible earthquakes and floods. The entire island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea, vanishing beneath the waves forever. It is this vivid combination of precise detail and tragic end that has fueled an endless search for its location. Scholars and explorers have proposed sites across the globe, from the volcanic ruins of Santorini in the Mediterranean to the deep waters of the Caribbean. But what makes this story so compelling is not just the question of its reality. It is the idea it planted in the human imagination, the very first detailed vision of a magnificent civilization, advanced yet fatally flawed, that ascended from the ocean and then returned to it. From the sunken rings of Atlantis, we travel to a place that defied the very ground it stood on. The ancient Greeks told of a different kind of floating realm, one born not of engineering but of divine transformation. It begins with the Titan goddess Asteria, pursued by an amorous Zeus. To escape his advances, she made a desperate choice, leaping from the heavens and transforming herself into a floating island, adrift and untethered in the Aegean Sea. This was no stationary landmass. It was a wandering sanctuary, a piece of earth that refused to be claimed. This mythical origin defined its entire existence. The island, which would later be known as Delos, was considered so sacred that it was forbidden for anyone to be born or to die upon its soil. Its floating nature was not just a physical trait, it was a spiritual one, a symbol of purity set apart from the messy realities of human life. But a sanctuary cannot remain forever adrift. The story goes that Zeus later anchored the island to the seabed with unbreakable diamond chains. This act of divine fixation transformed Delos from a nomadic refuge into the stable, beating heart of the ancient Greek world. It became the primary sanctuary for the worship of Apollo and Artemis, a religious center whose power and influence echoed across the Mediterranean. The myth of its floating origin was always central to its identity, a reminder that this was no ordinary place, but a divine gift, a piece of the heavens that chose to rest upon the sea. How many other sacred sites began as stories of movement, of lands that refused to be bound by the same rules as our own? The idea of a city unmoored from the earth took a breathtaking new form in the ancient skies of India. Far from the floating islands of the Aegean, Hindu scriptures like the Mahabharata describe a metropolis that conquered gravity itself, Hiranyapura, the Golden City. This was not a landmass adrift on water, but a fortress of unparalleled splendor built in the heavens, constructed of gold and precious metals that caught the sunlight like fire. It was home to two powerful races of demons, the Palomas and the Calacanyas, beings of immense strength and mystical knowledge. Their home was a technological marvel, a city that could travel at will through the clouds, a movable, untouchable kingdom that answered to no one. Imagine the awe and terror it must have inspired, a shimmering, silent palace drifting high above the world, its inhabitants looking down upon the earth from an unreachable throne. This dominion of the sky, however, was not destined to last forever. Its downfall came at the hands of the legendary hero Arjuna. In an epic confrontation detailed in the Mahabharata, Arjuna, a peerless archer, engaged the demons in a celestial war. The texts recount a fierce battle, with the flying city itself serving as a mobile fortress for its demonic inhabitants. Yet Arjuna, endowed with divine weapons and unwavering resolve, fought with such power that he ultimately shattered the golden city, bringing the magnificent Hiranyapura crashing down from the sky. This story is more than just a tale of a mythical battle. It is a profound exploration of power, technology, and hubris. The demons, for all their advanced knowledge, used their flying city to dominate and threaten. Their defeat symbolizes that even the most incredible technological achievements are vulnerable when they lack wisdom and virtue. What does it say about our own dreams of flight, that one of humanity's oldest stories of a sky city is also a cautionary tale about its destruction? While the golden city of Hiranyapura fell from the sky, another ethereal paradise was said to drift upon the eastern seas. In the rich tapestry of Chinese mythology, the mountain island of Penglai represents an entirely different kind of floating realm, one not of conquest but of eternal peace. It was known as one of the three floating mountains of the Immortals, a sacred sanctuary in the eastern sea that was not anchored to the ocean floor. This was not a city of demons, but a paradise where the legendary Eight Immortals were said to reside, living in a state of perfect harmony and free from the burdens of age and death. The island itself was described as being made of pure gold and jade, with palaces of crystal and trees that bore the fruit of everlasting life. Yet its most defining characteristic was its elusive nature. Penglai was not merely a stationary location one could sail to. It was a living part of the myth, forever shifting and moving upon the waves. Legends say that the entire mountain island would drift or be deliberately carried by a giant turtle, making it impossible for mortal ships to ever find a permanent anchor there. This was not a place that could be claimed or conquered. It could only be found by those who were truly worthy, those who had achieved a state of spiritual purity. This profound allure captivated the most powerful man in China, the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. Unifying China and standardizing its laws was not enough for him. He became consumed with a desperate quest for immortality. He sent out vast naval expeditions, led by his court magician Zhu Fu, with thousands of young men and women, to find the elusive Penglai and bring back the secret of eternal life. None of these expeditions ever succeeded. They returned with tales of encountering great sea monsters or simply finding nothing but endless ocean, the mountain island forever retreating from their grasp. The emperor's failure only deepened the legend, cementing Penglai not as a physical place to be found on a map, but as a spiritual ideal. Its image permeated Chinese art and poetry for centuries, a symbol of an unattainable paradise, a beautiful dream just beyond the horizon that forever inspires the human soul to seek something greater than itself. What does it say about our nature that we are so drawn to these places we can never truly reach? Far to the west, cloaked in the perpetual mists of the Atlantic, lies a phantom that refused to be forgotten. Celtic folklore speaks of Hy-Brasil, a circular island of enchantment that would materialize off the coast of Ireland once every 7 years. This was no ordinary landmass, but a realm from the otherworld, a place of advanced knowledge and eternal beauty that seemed to float just beyond the horizon, a perfect circle of land defying the known geography of the ocean. Its appearance was a spectacle of illusion, often described as being shrouded in a dense fog, with only its high central peak sometimes visible, creating the profound impression of an island that did not rest upon the waves but hovered above them. This spectral vision captivated the minds of explorers and cartographers for centuries. In the 1500s and 1600s, numerous expeditions set sail from the British Isles, their captains and financiers convinced they could pinpoint this floating prize. They braved the treacherous North Atlantic, chasing charts that placed the island squarely in the open ocean west of Ireland. The most famous of these voyages was led by a man named John Cabot, who sought it alongside his quest for the Northwest Passage. For a time, Hy-Brasil was even given a permanent spot on navigational maps, a testament to how powerfully this myth had gripped the European imagination. Yet, every time a ship drew near the coordinates, the island would vanish. The solid land promised by the charts would dissolve into a bank of low-lying cloud, or the crew would find nothing but empty, rolling sea. The scientific explanation eventually took hold, dismissing Hy-Brasil as a complex mirage, a trick of light and atmosphere known as a fata morgana, which can distort and elevate distant coastlines, making them appear as floating castles in the air. It was labeled a navigational error, a collective daydream, but the persistence of the legend asks a deeper question. Why did so many for so long believe in this circular island? Perhaps it was not a physical place they were seeking, but a glimpse of that Celtic otherworld, a promise that there is more to our reality than what we can firmly plant our feet upon. What does it say about us that we would rather chase a beautiful phantom than accept an empty horizon? Across the ocean, the search for a floating homeland defined the very soul of an empire. For the Aztec people, their legendary place of origin was not a sunken city or a sky palace, but a humble beginning on an island called Aztlán. The name itself means the place of whiteness or the place of herons, evoking a misty, serene landscape. Historical codices, the painted books that recorded their history, describe it as an island city situated in the middle of a lake. In some depictions, the city itself appears to float, its foundations built upon the water or magically resting upon a bed of reeds. This was not a tale of advanced technology, but of sacred geography, a place where the mundane and the divine met at the water's edge. Aztlán was the starting point of an epic migration, a spiritual directive from their patron god Huitzilopochtli, who commanded them to leave their tranquil home and journey until they found the prophesied sign, an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a snake. This vision would eventually lead them to the Valley of Mexico, where they founded the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, a real-world marvel of canals and artificial islands built in the image of that mythical homeland. The memory of Aztlán, however, was never forgotten. It remained the cradle of their civilization, a potent symbol of their identity and their divine right to rule. The concept of their original home floating on a lake was central to their worldview, a constant reminder that their power was born from the water. For centuries, scholars and explorers have tried to pin down its location, searching from the wetlands of northwestern Mexico to the American Southwest. Was Aztlán a real, physical place that can be discovered by archaeologists, or was it always a spiritual concept, a mythical point of departure that gave meaning to their entire history? The debate continues, but its power lies in the story itself, a story of a people who carried the memory of a floating city in their hearts, a memory that guided them to build one of the most astonishing empires the world has ever known. This concept of a sacred homeland floating on a lake finds a powerful parallel in one of humanity's oldest recorded stories. Deep within the clay tablets of ancient Sumer, a civilization that flourished in Mesopotamia thousands of years ago, we find the legend of Dilmun. This was not a city of war or a fortress in the sky, but a pristine and holy land, a paradise described as pure, clean, and profoundly bright. In the great epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest surviving epic poem, Dilmun is portrayed as a tranquil garden of the gods, a place untouched by sickness or death. It was the site where the mother goddess Ninhursag nurtured the first forms of life, a serene realm of creation where the sun god Utu himself was believed to rise each morning. The descriptions paint a picture of a land that was fundamentally separate from the mortal world, a blessed and luminous sanctuary. This separation is key to understanding its floating nature. While not explicitly described as floating on water like Aztlán, Dilmun was consistently portrayed as an elevated, almost ethereal realm, a holy land set apart by its divine essence. It was a place where fresh, life-giving water, a precious commodity in the arid Mesopotamian landscape, bubbled up freely from the earth without the need for rain. This abundance set it apart as a land of miracles. Scholars have long tried to anchor this paradise to a real-world location, with the most compelling candidate being the island of Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. Archaeological evidence shows that Bahrain was a center of ancient trade and a source of fresh water in a salty sea, a place that could easily have been mythologized into a land of purity and abundance by distant Mesopotamian scribes. But the question remains, why was Dilmun perceived with such otherworldly qualities? For a people living in a harsh, unpredictable environment, the idea of a land that was eternally bright, clean, and free from sorrow was the ultimate dream. It was a spiritual refuge, a conceptual floating island not of earth and water, but of hope and divine order, a shining beacon in the human imagination that promised a return to a state of perfect beginnings. How many of these floating realms are not places at all, but manifestations of our deepest yearning for peace and purity? From the serene paradise of Dilmun, we plunge into a far more violent and chaotic vision of the sea. The ancient Greeks feared more than just monsters in the deep. They feared the very geography itself. Guarding the entrance to the Black Sea through the narrow strait of the Bosphorus were the Symplegades, also known as the Clashing Rocks. These were not a city, but a pair of colossal, living islands. They were depicted as great, dark crags of stone that did not simply sit in the water. They floated with a terrible purpose, crashing together with the force of a thunderclap to pulverize any ship daring to pass between them. This was not a random natural hazard. It was a sentient, malevolent force, a gatekeeper that actively destroyed those who sought passage. The story of how they were defeated is one of the great adventures of Greek myth, the quest of Jason and the Argonauts for the Golden Fleece. Their ship, the Argo, had to pass this deadly barrier. Following a prophecy, Jason released a dove to fly ahead of the vessel. The rocks slammed together, shearing off the bird's tail feathers as it sped through. But then, as the rocks began to pull apart for their next victim, Jason ordered his crew to row with all their strength. The Argo shot forward, the timbers of her stern groaning as the crashing rocks clipped the very end of the ship. It was only through this clever trick, this use of foresight and timing, that they made it through. And according to the legend, from that moment on, the Symplegades were frozen in place, their magical movement broken forever. This myth is a profound example of how ancient cultures personified the immense dangers of the natural world. The unpredictable currents, the hidden reefs, the sudden storms, all of these were given form as sentient, floating entities. The clashing rocks were more than just rocks. They were the embodiment of a navigational nightmare, a test of both courage and cleverness for any hero. What other terrifying forces of nature did our ancestors see not as random events, but as conscious, moving opponents? Far from the chaotic clash of Greek rocks, a vision of serene order emerges from the heart of Buddhist cosmology. At the center of the world, according to ancient texts, lies the tranquil and mysterious Lake Anavatapta. This was no ordinary body of water. It was a celestial lake, believed to float in the air or exist in a realm beyond the mundane world, untouched by the heat of the three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. Its name itself means the unstinting, or the one without heat, signifying its pure, cooling nature. This lake was the mythical source of four great rivers, each flowing out from its perimeter in one of the four cardinal directions, symbolically nourishing the entire world. The imagery is one of perfect cosmic harmony, a still point from which life-giving waters emanate to all corners of creation. Surrounding this elevated lake was often described a lush, garden-like paradise, a realm of immense beauty and spiritual tranquility. This powerful concept of a central, floating lake and its garden profoundly influenced art and architecture across Asia. In Buddhist murals from India to China, and especially in Tibetan Thangka paintings, you can see depictions of this cosmological model. The lake is frequently shown as a perfect, serene blue circle, sometimes seemingly suspended with the four rivers snaking away like sacred serpents. This vision was not just artistic, it was architectural. The design of many Buddhist temples and mandalas mirrors this layout, with a central shrine or stupa representing the spiritual center, the Anavatapta lake, surrounded by courtyards or passages that echo the four flowing rivers. It represents a different kind of floating realm, one not of physical adventure but of spiritual geography. It is a map of the enlightened mind, a calm center from which compassion and wisdom flow outward into the world. Why is it that so many cultures, from the Sumerians with Dilmun to the Buddhists with Anavatapta, envision their ultimate paradise not just as a garden, but as a garden centered on a miraculous, life-giving source of water that seems to exist on a higher plane? Beneath the chaotic waves of the Norse world lay a hall of impossible calm. The sea god Ægir ruled from a palace that defied simple description, a realm that was neither fully submerged nor fixed to land, but a magical structure that seemed to float within the ocean itself. His great hall was a place of shimmering gold and quiet grandeur, said to be built from the very light of the sunken sun, and it possessed the ability to rise to the surface for the gods' grand feasts or vanish back into the deep, a true floating fortress of the sea. This was not a place of peril, but of celebration, where Ægir, with the help of his wife Ran, brewed the finest ale in all the cosmos within a cauldron a mile deep. The gods of Asgard would travel to this submerged sanctuary to drink, feast, and listen to the tales of the sea. In these myths, Ægir's hall becomes the ultimate crossroads, a space where the domains of sky, land, and ocean met. It was a place where Thor would lay down his mighty hammer and Odin would share his wisdom, all within walls that were as much a part of the sea as the currents themselves. This unique concept blends the idea of a sunken city with a floating one, a movable palace that was always where it needed to be, hidden from mortal eyes yet central to the lives of the gods. It asks us to reconsider what a floating city can be, not just a structure on the water, but a realm that exists between states, as fluid and changeable as the sea it calls home. What other wonders might lie in that ambiguous space, neither fully of the water nor fully of the air? Across the sea from Japan, shimmering on the edge of perception, lay a paradise known as Tokoyo no Kuni, the Eternal Land. This was not a destination for mortal sailors, but a divine realm, a utopia of eternal youth and immortality that existed in a space beyond the physical horizon. In Shinto beliefs, this was one of the Tokoyo, the eternal lands inhabited by powerful deities and ancestral spirits. It was a place untouched by decay or sorrow, where the trees bore fruit that granted everlasting life and the very air was charged with spiritual purity. The concept was deeply woven into the Japanese worldview, representing a cosmic counterpoint to the impermanent and often sorrowful human world. This blessed isle was sometimes described as floating upon the distant waves, a luminous land that could not be reached by conventional means, but only through divine favor or a profound spiritual journey. Its influence permeated Japanese folklore, inspiring tales of fishermen or heroes who, by chance or blessing, would stumble upon this eternal shore. only to return to their villages to find that centuries had passed in a single day. The search for Tokoyo no Kuni fueled the imaginations of emperors and common people alike, much like the Chinese quest for Penglai. It represented a deep yearning for a return to a primordial state of perfection, a land of the gods that was forever pure, forever young, and forever just out of reach. This vision of a blessed isle offered more than just a promise of immortality. It provided a spiritual anchor, a celestial homeland that gave meaning and order to the entire cosmos. Why is it that the most powerful visions of paradise are always described as being separated from us by an impassable barrier of water, as if the sea itself is the final test of our worthiness? The mists of Celtic lore also concealed a sanctuary for a fallen king. In the legends of Arthur Pendragon, the enchanted Isle of Avalon stands as his final refuge. After the tragic last battle at Camlan, where Arthur was mortally wounded, he was placed upon a barge and carried away to this mystical island. It was described as a place veiled in perpetual mist, an apple orchard isle that seemed to exist just beyond the edge of the known world, floating in a realm between the physical and the magical. This was not a land for ordinary men. Avalon was intrinsically linked to Arthur's divine right to rule, for it was here that his legendary sword, Excalibur, was forged, its metal imbued with the island's otherworldly power. The isle was ruled by 9 powerful sorceresses, the most famous being Arthur's own half-sister, Morgan Le Fay. She was a master of healing and magic, and it was under her care that Arthur was taken, not to die, but to sleep and be healed of his grievous wounds, awaiting the time when Britain would have need of him once more. This portrayal of Avalon as a hospital island, a floating center of ancient wisdom and restorative magic, captured the medieval imagination. Its connection to a real place began in the 12th century, when monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed to have discovered the tombs of Arthur and Queen Guinevere. They argued that Glastonbury Tor, a striking hill that rises from the flat Somerset levels, was the actual Isle of Avalon. In ancient times, before the surrounding marshes were drained, the Tor would have appeared as an island, often shrouded in sea fog, a solitary and mysterious peak that perfectly matched the legendary description. Was Avalon a real, physical location that inspired the myth, or was it always a spiritual concept, a metaphor for the afterlife or a timeless paradise where heroes never truly die? The search for its truth continues, but its power endures as the ultimate sanctuary, a floating promise that the greatest of leaders is not gone, but merely resting, waiting for the call to return. Deep in the shifting sands of the Arabian desert lies a legend of a city built to challenge the heavens. The Quran and pre-Islamic poetry tell of Iram, a magnificent metropolis of towering pillars raised by the powerful tribe of Ad. These people, blessed with immense strength and longevity, grew arrogant, believing their own works to be eternal. They carved their home from the living rock, erecting columns and palaces of such scale and splendor that the city was said to rival paradise itself. It was a place of unmatched worldly glory, a testament to human ambition in the heart of the barren desert. Yet their pride became their downfall. They rejected the prophet Hud, who was sent to guide them back to righteousness, and for their disbelief, a terrible punishment was sent. The ancient texts describe a furious, roaring wind that descended upon Iram for 7 nights and 8 days, a sandstorm of such divine fury that it scoured the city from the face of the earth, burying every last pillar and inhabitant beneath the dunes. The city of pillars was erased, leaving no trace but a cautionary tale whispered on the desert wind. This powerful story of hubris and divine justice, however, has taken on a strange new life in modern times. Some speculative theories, blending fringe archaeology with fantasy, have reimagined Iram not as a city built on the ground, but as one that floated or was suspended in the air. These interpretations twist the description of its lofty pillars into a vision of a city magically levitating above the desert, a mirage made permanent. While this is a dramatic departure from the original narrative, it reveals a fascinating pattern in our collective imagination. We see a lost city of impossible grandeur, and our minds instinctively lift it from the earth, transforming it into a floating marvel forever out of reach, a symbol not just of lost wealth, but of a civilization that literally rose above the world only to be cast down. Why does this theme of elevation and fall resonate so deeply with us, whether the city is swallowed by the sea, buried by sand, or simply vanished from the sky? High above the world, suspended between heaven and earth, a different kind of court was said to convene. Jewish midrashic texts, which are ancient commentaries and expansions on the Hebrew scriptures, speak of a mysterious entity known as the Goral. This was not a city of gold or a garden paradise, but a floating island of judgment, a divine tribunal that drifted in the air. The word Goral itself translates to lot or destiny, and this place was its ultimate embodiment. It was conceived as a cosmic scale, a realm where the souls of the righteous and the wicked were weighed, their fates decided not by earthly judges but by the unerring laws of the universe. Imagine a silent, solemn platform, unattached to the soil of human failing, where every action was measured with perfect justice. This image of a floating court is deeply symbolic within Jewish mystical thought. Its position in the air between the divine and the mortal signifies its role as an intermediary space. It is not the ultimate heaven, nor is it the flawed earth, but the precise point of intersection where divine justice is meted out. The Goral represents the idea that our lives are not subject to random chance, but to a system of moral accounting that is as real and structured as the physical cosmos. It is the ultimate floating scale, a reminder that every choice carries weight, and that destiny is not a blind force but a consequence. Why is it that so many cultures envision the administration of justice as needing to be physically elevated, lifted away from the corruption and bias of the ground below? The idea of a homeland floating in the air finds a profound echo in the very dawn of Persian spirituality. Zoroastrian tradition speaks of Hiranyapura, the Aryan expanse, described in the ancient Avestan texts as the first and most perfect of lands created by the supreme god Ahura Mazda. This was the mythical cradle of the Iranian peoples, a paradise of ideal climate and boundless fertility, where rivers flowed clear and the earth yielded its bounty without toil. It was considered the spiritual and geographical center of the world, a place of divine order and harmony, yet within its sacred geography lies a compelling mystery. While physically described as a lush plain, its theological primacy as the first creation led some esoteric interpretations to envision it as more than just earthly terrain. As the original, perfect blueprint for existence, conceived before the flaws of the material world took hold, Hiranyapura was sometimes visualized as a primordial and elevated realm. It was seen as a spiritual prototype, a divine idea that, in its purest form, floated above the corruption of later ages, untethered from the decay that would eventually plague the rest of creation. This was not a city of stone or a fortress of gold, but a homeland of the spirit, a floating archetype of perfection from which all other lands descended. The myth tells that this golden age could not last, that the blessed expanse was eventually assaulted by a great winter, a symbolic fall from grace that forced its inhabitants to migrate into the harsher, real world we know today. This transformation of the homeland from a perfect, elevated state to a lost, inaccessible memory resonates deeply with so many of these legends. Is our deepest longing not for a city that floats, but for a home we have fallen from, a perfect beginning that now seems to hover just beyond the reach of history? The shimmer of gold drew storytellers into the icy fringes of the known world. Greek historians like Herodotus recorded astonishing tales from Scythian traders who spoke of a land far to the north, a place of terrible wonder where vast quantities of gold lay unclaimed. This was not a treasure lightly guarded. The legends whispered it was protected by the griffins, mythical beasts with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, creatures of such ferocity that no mortal could approach the hoard. Herodotus, ever the careful collector of strange accounts, presented this as a traveler's story, a piece of geographical folklore from the edges of his map. The Scythians themselves were a nomadic people of the steppes, master horsemen and skilled goldsmiths, and the incredible golden artifacts pulled from their burial mounds, the intricate pectorals and animal figures, prove their deep and real connection to the precious metal. But as these accounts passed down through centuries, something fascinating happened to that northern land in the imagination of later writers. The story evolved beyond a simple treasure in a distant valley. Romantic reinterpretations began to describe this griffin-guarded realm not just as remote, but as fundamentally inaccessible. It was envisioned as a floating plateau or a solitary island, suspended in the air or adrift in a northern sea, a golden fortress lifted beyond the reach of human ambition. This was a powerful fusion of myth and material desire. The very real Scythian gold, so beautifully crafted and so valued, became the seed for a legend of a land that was not merely far away, but elevated, a prize that defied the very geography it sat upon. Why would our minds take a story of earthly wealth and lift it into the sky? Perhaps it is because the greatest treasures are always those that seem just beyond our grasp, protected not just by monsters, but by the very nature of our dreams. Before any land existed, there was only an endless sea and the vast, open sky. Yet the sky was not empty. For 700 years, the spirit of the air, a goddess named Ilmater, drifted in this primordial solitude, floating on the surface of the waters, a solitary being of immense patience and creative potential. She was the daughter of the air itself, a floating entity in a universe that had not yet taken shape. Her long solitude was a time of gestation, a quiet waiting for a spark of life to begin the work of creation. That spark arrived not with a cataclysm, but with the gentle beat of wings. A teal, a beautiful sea-going duck, weary from its own flight across the featureless expanse, spotted the floating goddess. Seeing what it mistook for a safe, solid refuge, the bird descended and built its nest upon Ilmater's knee, which rose from the water like a tiny island. There, in that impossible cradle, the teal laid a single, luminous egg. For days, the goddess remained perfectly still, feeling the warmth of the new life growing upon her. But a sudden, powerful impulse moved within her, a creative urge she could no longer contain. Ilmater shifted her leg, and the egg, its incubation interrupted, tumbled from its perch. It did not simply sink, it shattered upon the dark waters, and from its broken pieces the entire cosmos was assembled. The lower half of the shell formed the solid earth beneath our feet. The upper half arched upwards to become the dome of the heavens. The speckled yolk burst into a brilliant sun, and the delicate white of the egg scattered across the darkness to become the moon and all the stars. In this profound Finnish myth from the Kalevala, the entire world is not built upon a foundation of stone, but is born from a state of suspension. The earth, the sky, everything we know, is quite literally the scattered remains of an egg that was laid on a floating goddess. This transforms the very idea of a floating city. Here, the entire universe is the floating city, its origin forever tied to that moment of serene, patient creation upon the primordial sea. What does it say that one of our oldest stories does not tell of a world built from the ground up, but of a world that coalesced from fragments, all while cradled in the arms of the air itself? The world itself was born from a floating goddess, and across the vast Pacific, entire cultures traced their lineage to a homeland that moved. For the Polynesian peoples, the name Hawaii resonates with the power of a creation myth. This was not just a point on a map, but the ancestral homeland, the spiritual source from which their great voyaging canoes first set out to populate islands scattered across millions of square miles of ocean. In their oral traditions, Hawaii is described with a profound duality. It was both a specific, tangible place of origin and a mystical, shifting realm. It was often portrayed as an island that could not be pinned down, a land that moved or floated across the sea, accessible only through deep knowledge, memory, and sacred navigation. This concept was not born from fantasy, but from the practical reality of the most incredible explorers the world has ever known. The Polynesians mastered the art of wayfinding, reading the stars, the swell of the waves, the flight paths of birds, and the colors of the sky to navigate the open ocean with a precision that baffles modern historians. Their voyages were not random drifts, they were intentional journeys across thousands of miles of treacherous water. In this context, Hawaiki became more than a memory. It was a navigational star, a spiritual compass point. The idea of a floating, moving homeland perfectly mirrored their own experience of the world. A vast seascape where new lands could rise from the waves and familiar islands could vanish behind the horizon. When a new island was discovered and settled, it often received the sacred name Hawaiki in its local dialect, effectively recreating the ancestral homeland in a new location. This practice transformed the entire Pacific into a network of floating Hawaikis, each one a reflection of the original, each one anchoring a people to a myth that was as fluid and alive as the sea they sailed. How do you navigate home when home itself is a moving target? You do not sail to a fixed coordinate, you carry its essence within you, allowing the memory of a floating island to guide you to a new one, solid and real beneath your feet. High on the Andean plateau, where the air is thin and the sky feels close enough to touch, lies a body of water that was the birthplace of an empire. Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world, was far more than a geographical feature to the Inca. It was the very wellspring of existence, a primordial sea from which all life and order emerged. The creator god Viracocha first rose from its deep, dark waters in the time of absolute darkness before the sun or moon had been made. Standing on the sacred Isla del Sol, the island of the sun, he commanded the sun, the moon, and the stars to rise from the lake and take their places in the heavens, bringing light and time to the empty world. He then shaped the first human beings from the very stone of the island, breathing life into them and setting them on a path that would eventually lead to the founding of Cusco and the vast Inca civilization. This origin story transforms Lake Titicaca into a cosmic cradle. The Isla del Sol was not just an island in a lake, it was a floating sacred center, the stable point from which a god set the entire cosmos in motion. The lake itself was perceived as a vast, life-giving fluid that had buoyed up the very mechanisms of the universe. For the Inca, this was not a distant metaphor, it was a tangible truth that anchored their identity. They built temples and shrines on the island, making pilgrimages to the spot where the world began, a place where the boundary between the physical and the divine was as fluid as the water lapping at its shores. How many other cultures look not to the sky or a distant mountain, but to the still surface of a lake, seeing in its depths the reflection of their own divine beginning? For the ancient Maya, the cosmos was not a flat plane but a towering, living structure. At the center of everything stood the great world tree, a colossal ceiba, its roots plunging deep into the watery darkness of the underworld, Xibalba, and its immense branches rising to hold up the multiple layers of the heavens. This was not a stationary world, but a vertical stack of floating realms, each one a distinct celestial plane drifting in the space above the last. The sky itself was not a single dome, but a series of 13 layers, each governed by its own deity and possessing its own unique character. These were not simply levels in a building, they were worlds in their own right, floating one atop the other in a delicate cosmic balance maintained by the world tree's eternal strength. The lowest layers were closer to the human world, home to the moon and the morning star, while the highest tiers were the domain of the most ancient and powerful creator gods. You can see this intricate cosmology brought to life in surviving Mayan codices and the breathtaking murals at sites like Bonampak. Artists depicted the world tree as a massive, ornate cross, often with a great celestial bird perched in its highest branches and the dreadful lords of the underworld gathering among its roots. The floating layers of the sky are shown as bands, sometimes represented by twin-headed serpents whose bodies arch across the scene, separating one divine realm from the next. This vertical conception of the universe made the sky a place of immense activity and spiritual journey. When a Mayan king died, his soul was believed to ascend this celestial ladder, navigating through each floating layer to finally join the ancestors in the highest heaven. This was a universe in constant, structured motion, a sacred architecture of floating worlds that defined their understanding of life, death, and the divine order. Why is it that so many cultures, from the Buddhists with their cosmic lake to the Maya with their layered skies, envision the universe not as a single realm, but as a carefully ordered stack of realities, each one floating in its own sacred space? Even the most devout faith could be tested by the wonders of the open ocean. Centuries after the fall of Rome, an Irish monk named Saint Brendan set sail into the North Atlantic on a divine quest, seeking a fabled paradise the monks called the Promised Land of the Saints. His voyage, recorded in a fantastical narrative known as the Navigatio Sancti Brendani, reads like a map of medieval miracles, but one episode stands out for its sheer, startling impossibility. After weeks of endless grey waves, Brendan and his crew spotted a dark, low-lying island on the horizon, a welcome promise of solid ground and fresh water. They steered their small leather-hulled boat toward it, their hearts lifting with relief. They landed, dragged their craft ashore, and began to set up a campsite, gathering wood to build a fire right there on the black, gritty sand. But as the flames took hold, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The entire island shuddered and began to move, heaving upwards as the monks scrambled in terror back to their boat. What they had mistaken for solid land was the broad, barnacle-crusted back of a colossal sea creature, an ancient leviathan the texts called Jasconius. This was not a metaphor for a volcanic island or a trick of the light. It was a literal, living island, a beast so vast that its slumbering form could support an entire ecosystem. The line between geography and biology had completely vanished. This story of Jasconius, the floating island that was not an island, became one of the most enduring images from Brendan's voyage, a perfect blend of monastic piety and deep-sea monster lore. For medieval readers, it was a powerful lesson about the hidden, living nature of God's creation, a world where even the ground beneath your feet might be a slumbering giant. It asks a profound question of any explorer: how can you be sure of what you are standing on when the entire world is alive with mystery? St. Brendan's living island reveals a world where nothing is as solid as it appears. This blurring of reality finds its ultimate expression in a scientific marvel that haunted sailors for centuries, the Fata Morgana. This is not a simple heat haze on a desert road, but an incredibly complex mirage, a trick of light and atmosphere that occurs when layers of air at different temperatures bend and distort light rays like a giant, invisible lens. The result can be breathtaking and terrifying. A distant, mundane coastline or even a lone ship just over the horizon can be stretched, inverted, and multiplied in the sky. Its silhouette elongates into towering spires and crenellated walls, transforming into the image of a magnificent, impossible city floating serenely above the waves. The name itself comes from the Arthurian sorceress Morgan Le Fay, hinting at its long history of being seen as a form of enchantment. Historical logs from the Age of Exploration are filled with such visions. Italian sailors in the Strait of Messina would report seeing fairy tale castles hovering between Sicily and the Italian mainland. In the cold Arctic seas, explorers would document entire phantom archipelagos, complete with mountains and valleys, that would appear on the horizon only to vanish hours later as their ship drew closer. These were not the hallucinations of desperate men, but consistent, repeatable observations of a powerful optical phenomenon. This scientific explanation provides a compelling key for unlocking the mystery of so many floating city legends. The elusive Hy-Brasil, appearing only once every 7 years, could easily have been a fata morgana of a real but distant island, its shape warped and elevated by a perfect alignment of cold and warm air. The shimmering palaces of Tokoyo no Kuni, reported by Japanese fishermen, could have been the distorted reflections of a remote, storm-racked coastline. For the first time, we have a mechanism, a natural magic trick that can conjure a floating city out of thin air for an entire crew to witness. It grounds these myths in a tangible, physical reality, yet it does not rob them of their wonder. Instead, it deepens the mystery. These sailors were not lying or fantasizing. They were reporting exactly what their eyes beheld, a genuine phantom crafted by the atmosphere itself. What does it mean that our own planet is capable of such artistry, painting its own legends upon the empty canvas of the sea? The phantom cities of the Fata Morgana were not the only deceptions waiting upon the Celtic Sea. In the rich tradition of the Irish Imram, or voyage tales, the ocean itself was a realm of profound and active trickery. One of the most celebrated of these is the voyage of male Dilmun, a saga of revenge and wonder that takes its hero across a sea dotted with impossible islands. Driven by a quest to avenge his murdered father, male Dilmun and his crew navigate a world where the very definition of land is called into question. Among the many wonders they encounter, one stands out for its sheer, visceral terror. They come upon an island that appears inviting, its surface covered in a lush green carpet. The men land and begin to explore, only to feel the ground shift and roll beneath their feet in a slow, rhythmic motion. To their horror, they realize they are not standing on soil and rock, but on the colossal, living hide of a sea monster so vast that its back has been mistaken for an entire landmass. This was not a serene creature like St. Brendan's Jasconius, but a beast whose true nature filled the sailors with a primal dread, forcing them to flee back to the safety of their boat. The parallels with St. Brendan's story are striking, yet the differences are equally telling. Both tales feature a living island, a fundamental deception that challenges the sailor's perception of reality. But where Brendan's encounter carries a tone of divine wonder, a lesson in the marvels of God's creation, male Dilmun's experience is far more perilous, underscoring the active dangers of his vengeful quest. This recurring motif of the treacherous living island reveals a core truth of Celtic seafaring lore. For a culture whose sailors braved the treacherous North Atlantic, the ocean was not an empty expanse, but a living entity full of conscious deception. An island that was not an island was the ultimate metaphor for the unknown, a warning that anything promising safe harbor could, in an instant, reveal itself as a mortal threat. It was the sea's way of reminding them that nothing, not even the ground beneath their feet, could be trusted. How many other uncharted shores in our own lives might be something far more dangerous and far more alive than they first appear? The sea holds more than monsters and mirages. It also guards the memory of drowned kingdoms. Off the coast of Wales, in the great expanse of Cardigan Bay, the legend of Cantre'r Gwaelod endures. This was the Lowland Hundred, a vast and fertile kingdom, rich with farmland and prosperous villages protected from the sea by a magnificent dike. This was not a floating city in the traditional sense, but a low-lying territory that, in its final days, would have presented a haunting spectacle. Imagine the view from a distant hill, looking out across the bay during a storm surge or an unusually high tide. The sea would have poured over the protective walls, flooding the fields and settlements. The kingdom, with its network of canals and waterways glinting in the sun, would have seemed to merge with the ocean itself, a shimmering, semi-aquatic plain that appeared to float upon the surface of the water. This visual illusion, witnessed by those on the higher ground, would have been the last glimpse of a civilization in its death throes, a sight so powerful it cemented the story of a land that belonged to the sea. The tale of its downfall is a classic tragedy of human error. The great sluice gates in the defensive dike were managed by a single watchman, a prince named Sethanin. One fateful night during a great storm, he was said to have been at a feast in the king's palace, indulging too freely. Drunk and negligent, he forgot his crucial duty, leaving the gates open as the tide rushed in. The sea poured through the breach, flooding the entire kingdom in a single, catastrophic event. To this day, Welsh folklore claims you can still hear the bells of the drowned churches ringing mournfully beneath the waves on a quiet day. The legend transforms a geological event, the slow subsidence of coastal land, into a poignant human drama. It asks us if we are remembering a real, submerged landscape, a prehistoric territory now lying on the seabed, or if we are preserving a deeper warning about the fragility of our own civilizations against the rising tide. How many other sunken realms began as lands that merely seemed to float, their final moments misinterpreted as their true nature? The tragedy of a kingdom lost to the sea echoes from Wales to the southernmost tip of England, where the legends of King Arthur hold a different kind of drowned land. In the chivalric romances, Lyoness was the home of the heroic knight Tristan, a land of towering castles and sweeping forests. But in Cornish folklore, it was something more tangible, a vast and fertile plain that once stretched from the mainland all the way to the Isles of Scilly, a land bridge connecting what are now 48 solitary islands. This was not a low-lying territory like Cantre'r Gwaelod, but a complete landscape, complete with its own villages, farms, and a bustling population, all of which was said to have vanished in a single cataclysmic night. A great storm surge, sent by a vengeful god or perhaps born of the land's own fragility, swallowed the entire plain, leaving only the highest hilltops as the scattered archipelago we see today. The memory of this lost world persists in a hauntingly beautiful sound, the same that is heard in Wales, the ghostly peal of church bells drifting up from beneath the waves. Fishermen and sailors in the area have long reported hearing the melodic, submerged ringing on calm, foggy mornings, a chorus from a sunken city. This phenomenon transforms the seascape into a spectral memorial. The solid ground of the present-day island seems to float upon the ghost of the old kingdom, the ringing bells a constant auditory reminder that the land beneath the water is not truly gone but sleeping. Is this the sound of a civilization calling out to be remembered, or is it the ocean itself, playing a natural instrument created by currents swirling through hollow ruins? The legend of Lyoness blurs the line between geography and memory, leaving us with a landscape that feels forever half-submerged, a ghost of itself. Deep beneath the earth, far from the sun and sky, another kind of floating realm awaited the soul. In the intricate cosmology of Hindu texts, the universe is divided into three primary worlds, and below our own lies Patala, the magnificent netherworld. This is not a place of simple darkness or punishment, but a complex domain of 7 stunning subterranean levels, each more splendid than the last. These are the Nagaloka, the abodes of powerful serpent beings known as the Nagas, who are not monsters but divine entities of immense wisdom and magical power. Their cities are described as architectural wonders, with palaces crafted from glittering gems and gold, illuminated by the light of colossal, radiant jewels that serve as their subterranean suns and moons. The unique floating nature of these realms comes from their relationship with the waters that flow through the earth. Ancient art and scripture often depict these Naga cities rising from vast, placid underground lakes or built upon the shores of subterranean rivers. To a visitor, the reflections of the jeweled palaces on the dark, still water would merge with the structures themselves, creating the breathtaking illusion of entire districts hovering weightlessly upon the surface, a silent, inverted sky of glittering architecture. This vision transforms the concept of a floating city from an aerial dream into a chthonic one. It suggests that the wonder of buoyancy, of realms defying their expected foundation, is not limited to the heavens or the sea, but can exist in the deepest, most secret places of the world. The Nagas are revered as guardians of the Earth's treasures, both mineral and spiritual, and their floating subterranean capitals symbolize a profound truth. that the greatest mysteries and the most potent magic are often hidden from plain view, resting on a foundation of deep, unseen currents. Why would a culture envision its underworld not as a pit of fire, but as a series of resplendent, floating palaces? Perhaps it reveals a belief that even the depths hold their own form of beauty and order, a celestial realm turned inward, forever shimmering on the dark, silent waters below. The Phaeacians lived at the very edge of the known world, their island of Scheria a final, shimmering gateway before the endless, mythic ocean. In Homer's Odyssey, this was the kingdom that welcomed a shipwrecked and exhausted Odysseus, a place of impossible comfort and advanced civilization. While their home was an island rooted in the sea, the true marvel of the Phaeacians was their fleet, a technology so extraordinary it made their entire culture seem to float upon the waves. Their ships were unlike any other, crafted with a divine intelligence that removed the need for rudders or pilots. Homer describes them as knowing the thoughts and intentions of their sailors, navigating the vast, empty seas with their own conscious will, gliding like a thought across the water's surface. These vessels did not simply sail, they moved as an extension of the mind itself, a seamless fusion of human purpose and magical engineering. This concept transforms Scheria from a simple island stop into a civilization defined by its fluid mastery over the sea. The solid ground of their city was almost an afterthought, a stationary dock for a people whose true element was the ever-moving current. Their ships were the floating components of their realm, the mobile, thinking cities that connected their fixed home to every corner of the world. When they finally carried the sleeping Odysseus back to Ithaca, they did so with a speed and silence that defied nature, covering a journey of many weeks in a single dreamlike night. This act of effortless, magical transport cemented their legend. They were the ultimate navigators, a people so in tune with the ocean that their technology appeared to be an organic part of it. Their story pushes the idea of a floating city one step further, suggesting that the dream is not just about a stationary place that hovers, but about a civilization that achieves such a profound connection with its environment that it moves with the same effortless grace as a passing cloud. What would it mean to live in a world where your journey home was not a struggle against the waves, but a thought directed across them? Jonathan Swift's pen carved a floating island from pure satire. In his 1726 masterpiece, Gulliver's Travels, he introduced the world to Laputa, a vast circular landmass that drifts high above the earth, a kingdom of the sky steered not by magic but by science. At its core rests a colossal lodestone, a giant magnet of impossible power, which the island's philosophers can tilt and manipulate to raise, lower, and propel their domain across the heavens. This gave them absolute dominion over the continent of Balnibar, by below, for they could simply hover their island over any rebellious province, blocking out the sun and rain to enforce obedience, or even drop great stones upon the cities in a terrifying display of detached authority. Yet the true absurdity of Laputa was not its technology, but its people. The Laputans are so consumed by abstract intellectual pursuits, by mathematics and music, that they have become utterly disconnected from the physical world and their own humanity. They require servants called flappers to tap their mouths with inflated bladders to remind them to speak, and to tap their ears so they will remember to listen. Their clothes are ill-fitting, covered in celestial and musical diagrams, and their conversations are a whirlwind of theoretical nonsense, completely devoid of practical application or empathy. Swift was launching a direct and hilarious attack on the Royal Society of London, an institution dedicated to the new sciences, which he saw as fostering a dangerous obsession with theoretical knowledge at the expense of common sense and moral responsibility. Laputa was his warning, a vision of a society so elevated by its own intellect that it literally floats above the problems of the world it tyrannizes. This brilliant, cynical creation did more than just critique his contemporaries. It permanently lodged the image of a scientifically powered flying city into the Western imagination. transforming a philosophical joke into one of our most enduring architectural dreams. What does it say that our modern visions of floating metropolises so often carry this same shadow of detachment, a warning that to rise above the earth is to risk losing touch with it entirely? A different kind of drowned kingdom lies off the coast of Brittany, where the legend of Wise tells a story of human folly and divine punishment. This magnificent city was a marvel of ancient engineering, constructed entirely below sea level, protected from the relentless ocean by a single, massive dike and a set of imposing bronze gates. The king who built it held the only key to these gates, a solemn responsibility passed down to ensure the city's safety. Wise was a place of immense wealth and vibrant culture, its towers and streets bustling with life, yet it rested in a precarious bowl, the sea looming like a wall above its rooftops. The city's fate, however, was sealed not by a storm but by a princess's heart. The king's daughter, Dahat, was known for her wild and reckless nature, and one night she was seduced by a mysterious stranger who appeared at a masquerade. Charmed by this demon in disguise, she agreed to his demand for a terrible price, the key to the sea gates. In a moment of passion, or perhaps a twisted sense of adventure, she stole the key from her own father as he slept. The stranger took it, strode to the great dike, and unlocked the bronze gates. The ocean, held back for generations, thundered into the basin with an unimaginable roar. The king was awakened by the sound of rushing water and managed to escape on his horse, but Princess Dahat was swept away by the waves, some versions of the tale saying she was transformed into a Morgan, a malevolent sea spirit. The entire glorious city of Wise was swallowed by the sea in a single, catastrophic night. But like Cantre'r Gwaelod, Wise did not vanish completely from memory. Breton fishermen insist that on calm, quiet days, you can still hear the mournful sound of its church bells ringing from the depths. Some even claim that at the very lowest tides, the ghostly silhouettes of its tallest towers can be seen just beneath the water's surface, a shimmering, distorted vision of a world that once was. This fleeting apparition creates the haunting illusion of a city floating just below the waves, a ghostly reflection forever trapped between the world of the living and the realm of legend. Why do these drowned cities refuse to stay silent, their bells and towers persistently reminding us of their tragic end? While legends speak of cities that drift on water or soar through clouds, a real-world sanctuary achieved the same breathtaking effect by clinging to the sky. In the heart of Greece, the monasteries of Meteora stand as a testament to human devotion and ingenuity, a collection of sacred structures perched atop immense natural sandstone pillars that rise 1,000 feet from the plains of Thessaly. Constructed primarily in the 14th century by Eastern Orthodox monks seeking spiritual isolation, these monasteries were not just built on high ground, they were engineered to exist in a realm apart. Reaching them was a feat of faith and physics, initially requiring retractable ladders or baskets hauled up by ropes and a system of nets. The monks literally ascended into the heavens, pulling themselves away from the worldly concerns of the earth below. To any observer gazing up from the valley, especially in the early morning mist that shrouds the pillars' bases, the monasteries appear to float completely untethered, their stone walls and red-tiled roofs hovering like divine vessels in the air. This was precisely the point. The very name Meteora means suspended in the air, and the monks cultivated this image deliberately. Their existence was a physical manifestation of their spiritual goal, to live suspended between heaven and earth, closer to God and further from worldly temptation. The monasteries were not just buildings, they were statements carved from rock and faith, proving that the dream of a floating sanctuary could be made real not by magic, but by an unwavering human will to reach for the divine. How many other myths of floating realms were born from a distant glimpse of something like this, a community of people living so high above the world that they seem to have conquered gravity itself? The real world has a way of building the legends we only dream of. No myth captures the marriage of human ambition and water more perfectly than the very real city of Venice. For over 1,000 years, this labyrinth of canals and marble has stood as a testament to one of history's greatest engineering gambles. The entire metropolis was constructed not on solid ground, but on a foundation of countless wooden piles driven deep into the unstable mudbanks of a lagoon. These timbers, mostly of water-resistant alder wood, were hammered into the compressed clay until they reached a more solid layer, creating a submerged forest upon which the stone city was built. To stand in a Venetian piazza is to stand upon the petrified remains of an ancient forest, a hidden grid that has defiantly held up a civilization for centuries. From the water, the effect is magical. The ornate facades of palazzos rise directly from the canals with no visible earth or foundation, creating the undeniable illusion that the entire city is floating serenely upon the surface. This was not an accident of perception, but the very essence of its design. Venice does not occupy the water, it is an extension of it, a man-made island so seamlessly integrated with its environment that it appears to be a natural outgrowth of the sea itself. This tangible, breathing reality has acted as a powerful mirror to all the mythical tales of aquatic realms. For any merchant or pilgrim traveling from the inland, the first sight of Venice shimmering on the horizon must have felt like discovering Atlantis risen from the deep or the elusive Hy-Brasil made solid. It was a living confirmation that a city of stone could indeed live in harmony with the ocean, that the legends of glorious water-born kingdoms were not pure fantasy. Venice became the archetype, the proof of concept that fueled the imagination of storytellers and explorers for generations. It stands as the ultimate bridge between the mythical floating city and the engineered one, a place where the line between miraculous legend and human achievement is as fluid as the water that laps against its doors. A shimmering palace of jade and gold materialized in the sky, its tiered roofs and arched bridges suspended perfectly among the clouds. This was the breathtaking vision that greeted the monk Xuanzang and his disciples in the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West. They were not witnessing a miracle, but a meticulously crafted snare. The demons they faced were not mere brutes, they were masters of psychological warfare, weaving illusions that preyed upon the deepest desires of their victims. For a pious monk on a holy pilgrimage, what greater temptation could there be than a celestial city, a divine reward floating just within reach? This phantom realm was a narrative trap, a fata morgana given sentient malice. It promised sanctuary and spiritual affirmation, a sign from the heavens that the arduous journey was nearing its blessed end. The demons understood that the most effective deception is one the victim desperately wants to believe. The city in the clouds was a perfect illusion, built not from light and air, but from the hopes and pride of those who beheld it. It was a test far more dangerous than any physical monster, for it challenged the very discernment and humility required to complete the pilgrimage. This story brilliantly reframes the floating city from a lost paradise into an active antagonist. It is no longer a place to be discovered, but a lure to be resisted, a lesson that the most beautiful visions can be the most treacherous. How many explorers, chasing a mirage of glory or knowledge, have sailed straight into the jaws of their own ruin, convinced they were headed for a heavenly shore? A desperate hope drifted across the battlefields of medieval Europe, a rumor of a savior waiting in the distant, uncharted East. During the Crusades, as European kingdoms struggled against powerful Islamic forces, a story began to circulate about a mighty Christian king, a patriarch known as Prester John. He was said to rule a vast and glorious empire hidden somewhere beyond the lands of the Saracens, a kingdom of such immense wealth and piety that he could crush the enemies of Christendom from the rear. This was not just a political fantasy, it was a spiritual lifeline. Then, in the mid-12th century, a letter appeared, addressed to the Byzantine emperor and later to the Pope. Purportedly written by Prester John himself, it described his kingdom in breathtaking, impossible detail. He claimed to rule over 72 provinces, each with its own king, and his lands were home to wonders that defied all known geography. There were rivers of flowing gemstones, deserts of sand that were actually powdered gold, and a palace built entirely of crystal. But the most captivating wonders were those tied to the landscape itself. The letter described the fountain of youth, a spring whose waters could restore a man's youth, not as a simple well on the ground, but as a feature on a floating island surrounded by magical, impassable rivers. This detail transformed his kingdom from a mere distant land into a truly otherworldly realm. A fountain that granted eternal life was a marvel, but a fountain on an island that floated was a miracle, placing it firmly in the domain of the magical and the divine. It meant his entire empire was a sacred geography, a place where the very earth did not obey the normal laws of nature. For centuries, popes and kings sent emissaries eastward, searching for this lost Christian kingdom and its magical, floating sanctuaries. They traveled to India, to Central Asia, to the heart of Africa, following every rumor. Each expedition that returned empty-handed only deepened the mystery, allowing the legend to grow and shift, always staying just beyond the edge of the newest map. The story of Prester John's kingdom reveals a profound truth about the human spirit in the face of the unknown. When confronted with vast, blank spaces on the globe, we do not simply see emptiness. We fill them with our deepest hopes and our most elaborate dreams, creating phantom allies and floating paradises, all waiting to be found by those with the courage to look. The same misty landscapes that birthed Hy-Brasil also concealed a kingdom far closer to home. In the heart of the Irish countryside, beneath the gentle slopes of ancient mounds, the Celtic Shia held their court. These were not mere fairy folk of children's tales, but the powerful, divine race known as the Shi, the people of the mounds. Their world was a parallel dimension of eternal youth and beauty, a shimmering realm that existed just alongside our own, separated by the thinnest of veils. The very earth you walked on was their ceiling, for their magnificent cities lay not on the land but within it. These hollow hills or Shia mounds were the sacred doorways between the worlds. From the outside, a mound appeared as a simple, grassy knoll, but to step inside at the right time, such as during the festivals of Samhain or Beltane when the veil was thin, was to enter a breathtaking inversion. The interior was not a dark cavern, but a vast, luminous hall, a palace of unearthly splendor where time flowed differently and joy was unending. To the mortal who might catch a fleeting glimpse, this interior world seemed to hang in the air, a golden city suspended in a dimension just beyond reach. The Shia were the guardians of this floating reality, a civilization that did not build upon the earth, but wove their existence into its very fabric, creating a homeland that effectively floated in a parallel stream of time and space, forever present, yet forever just out of touch. Why would a culture envision its gods and ancestors living not in a distant heaven, but in a world layered directly beneath their feet? It suggests a belief that the miraculous was never far away, but was always there, a breath away, waiting for the moment when the world would turn and the door to that floating, timeless city would swing open. High in the volcanic peaks of Indonesia, where the air grows thin and the world falls away, another floating realm emerges from the mist. Across the islands of Java and Sumatra, folklore speaks of the Negeri di Atas Awan, the land above the clouds. These are not cities adrift on water, but entire kingdoms thought to be suspended in the sky, hidden high in the mountains where the clouds cling to the slopes like a permanent veil. From the valleys below, these shrouded peaks create a powerful illusion, their bases obscured and their summits seeming to float completely detached from the earth, islands in a sea of white. This vision is deeply woven into the spiritual fabric of the region, where volcanic mountains like Mount Bromo or Mount Karinsai are not merely geological features but sacred abodes. They are believed to be the homes of powerful gods, ancestral spirits, and mythical beings who watch over the world from their elevated sanctuaries. The stories describe these high kingdoms as places of immense beauty and ancient power, accessible only to the pure of heart or through a spiritual journey, guarded by the very mists that make them appear to float. The persistent belief in these sky realms reflects a profound reverence for the natural world, a recognition of the mountain as a living bridge between the human and the divine. Why is it that mountains, the most grounded features of our planet, so often inspire the very opposite idea, giving birth to legends of lands that have escaped their own foundations? Beneath the sun-baked plains of Sumer, the ground concealed a different kind of sea. The ancient Mesopotamians envisioned the Abzu not as a simple body of water, but as the vast, primordial ocean of fresh water that flowed in immense caverns deep below the Earth's surface. This was the domain of the god Enki, the master of wisdom, magic, and the fundamental arts of civilization. His home was not a sunken city, but a resplendent underwater palace, a realm of profound, silent power that existed as the hidden foundation for the world above. Imagine the perspective of a farmer kneeling in the dry soil, knowing that just beneath the crust of the earth lay an infinite, life-giving reservoir, the source of every spring, every well, and the two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, that made his life possible. The Abzu was the ultimate hidden source, a floating conceptual realm in its own right, suspended between the solid ground and the even deeper, darker underworld. It was a place of creation and wisdom where Enki held the sacred me, the divine decrees that governed everything from kingship to basket weaving. This depiction of a foundational, buoyant world of water shares a deep conceptual kinship with floating cities. It is another expression of that human instinct to envision powerful, magical realms as being elevated or suspended in their own sacred space, separate from the mundane world we walk upon. Why do we so often place the sources of ultimate knowledge and power in these inaccessible, fluid dimensions, whether they float in the sky, drift on the sea, or rest in the caverns below? The Norse cosmos itself was a collection of worlds suspended in the great branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Among these 9 realms, Vanaheim held a special place as the homeland of the Vanir gods, a tribe of deities distinct from the more familiar Ægir of Asgard. Where Odin and Thor represented sovereignty and raw power, the Vanir were the masters of a different kind of magic, deeply connected to the earth's fertility, the secrets of nature, and the gentle, profound wisdom of seers and healers. Their world is described in the ancient texts with a beautiful vagueness, a land of abundance and mystical power. This very lack of concrete detail has allowed the modern imagination to flourish. Artists and storytellers, drawing from the core Norse image of all the realms as distinct worlds held aloft by the tree, often depict Vanaheim not just as another land, but as a lush, verdant realm that seems to float independently within the cosmic architecture of Yggdrasil. Picture a landscape of rolling, emerald hills and ancient forests, its borders undefined, drifting in a serene, eternal spring. This floating quality perfectly mirrors the nature of the Vanir themselves, whose power was not in towering fortresses, but in the unseen forces that make the crops grow and the seasons turn. They were gods of the process, not the monument, and a homeland that floated, unanchored and alive, suits them far better than a static kingdom. It suggests a realm that is less a place and more a state of being, a pocket of fertile magic forever blossoming in the spaces between the worlds. What does it mean that a culture would envision the source of life's abundance as a world set adrift, reminding us that growth and wisdom are not fixed to the ground, but are dynamic, living forces? Far to the north, beyond the highest peaks of the Himalayas, Tibetan Buddhist texts describe a kingdom ringed by a fortress of impassable snow-capped mountains. This is Shambhala, a hidden realm of perfect peace and harmony, a society governed by wisdom and compassion where its inhabitants live in accordance with the purest teachings of the Buddha. It is not a city floating on water, but its spiritual isolation creates a profound sense of elevation. Shambhala is envisioned as a lush, circular valley, so secluded and so pure that it seems to exist on a higher plane of reality, effectively floating above the moral and spiritual turmoil of the outside world. This is a land untouched by greed, aggression, or delusion, where the very landscape reflects the enlightened mind of its people. The path to Shambhala is not found on any physical map, but through a long and arduous inner journey of spiritual cultivation. Only those who have purified their hearts and minds can hope to find the passage through the White Mountains, a journey that is as much about traversing the inner landscape of the soul as it is about crossing geographical distances. This hidden nature has fueled countless expeditions, from mystics and lamas to Western adventurers, all hoping to glimpse this earthly paradise. Yet the scriptures are clear: Shambhala remains concealed not by chance, but by purpose, a sanctuary protecting the final, purest teachings until the world is ready for their wisdom. It is a promise that a perfect society endures, a sanctuary that floats not on water, but on hope, waiting for the day when its peace will spread across the entire earth. How many of us carry a map to our own hidden Shambhala, a place of inner peace that seems to float just beyond the rocky terrain of our daily struggles? Another spiritual architecture of light defies any earthly blueprint. Among the esoteric traditions of the early centuries, the Gnostics spoke of the pleroma, a concept of breathtaking scope. This was not a city of stone or a garden in the clouds, but the fullness of God itself, the totality of all divine powers and attributes, envisioned as a vast realm of pure, luminous spirit. Imagine a cosmos within a cosmos, a silent, radiant expanse comprised of countless layers of consciousness known as eons. Each eon is a distinct emanation of the divine, a personified aspect of God's nature, like wisdom, truth, or forethought, existing in perfect harmony. Together, these layered eons form the pleroma, the ultimate, self-contained reality, a divine metropolis of entities floating in a sea of absolute light and knowledge. This realm exists entirely beyond the flawed, physical world we inhabit, which the Gnostics saw as a distant and tragic creation, a shadow cast by a lesser, ignorant god. The pleroma was the true home of the human spirit, a spark of which lay trapped within the clumsy prison of the material body. The entire Gnostic path was a journey of awakening, a struggle to remember this lost celestial homeland and navigate the soul back through the layered eons to rejoin the luminous whole. It is perhaps the most profound vision of a floating realm ever conceived, for it is not a place one can sail or fly to, but a state of being to be realized. The entire material universe, with its planets and stars, is the sinking ship, and the pleroma is the radiant, waiting harbor, forever floating just beyond the veil of perception. Why is it that our most ambitious spiritual dreams so often take the shape of a city, even when that city is made of nothing but light and thought? The alchemist's quest for gold was merely a surface illusion, a coded language for a far more profound transformation. Concealed within their cryptic manuscripts and intricate illustrations lies the vision of a city built not from stone, but from spirit, the magnificent city of the sun. This was no place you could find on any map, but the ultimate allegorical destination of the great work, the process of spiritual and personal perfection. Described as a perfectly circular metropolis fortified by 7 unassailable walls, it represented a soul that had achieved complete inner harmony and invulnerability to worldly corruption. Its geometric perfection was a symbol of the alchemist's own mind, refined and ordered through years of disciplined labor, and its location was always elevated, often shown perched atop a towering, inaccessible mountain, or, in some daring illuminations, hovering serenely in the air, detached from the base earth below. This floating quality was the final, most telling clue. The city of the sun did not rest upon the common ground of ordinary human consciousness. It was a realm of elevated knowledge, a state of being so purified and enlightened that it literally floated above the chaos of the material world. To enter this city was to have completed the journey, to have transformed the lead of a flawed existence into the gold of a perfected self. Why would these seekers of hidden truth choose the image of a floating city as their ultimate prize? Perhaps because true enlightenment always feels like a release from gravity, a final, breathtaking ascent to a perspective where everything finally makes sense. Our own world is a spiral castle, its form etched in the sacred stories of Native American peoples. For the Cherokee and many Pueblo cultures, the cosmos is not a random scattering of stars, but a carefully ordered structure of celestial dwellings. The spiral castle is one such realm, a sky world often associated with the constellation we call Corona Borealis, the Northern Crown. This was not a fortress of stone, but a swirling, luminous city of the spirits, a place where deities and ancestral beings resided in a perfect, timeless harmony. Its spiral form reflects the very pattern of life itself, the coiled energy of a snake, the whirl of a galaxy, and the inward path of meditation. This celestial home was fundamentally inaccessible by ordinary means. You could not build a tower high enough to reach it, nor a ship swift enough to sail the cosmic sea. Access was granted only through profound spiritual discipline, through the sacred visions sought in rituals, fasting, and prayer. A seeker would enter a trance state, and their consciousness, their spirit, would begin the arduous journey upward, navigating the swirling pathways of the castle to receive wisdom from the star-born beings within. This transforms the concept of a floating city from a physical place into a state of higher awareness. The spiral castle floats because it exists on a different plane of reality, a dimension of pure thought and spirit that overlaps our own but remains just beyond our waking grasp. Why would a culture choose a spiral of all shapes to represent its ultimate celestial home? Perhaps because the journey to truth is never a straight line, but a winding ascent, a gradual awakening that leads you back to the center of everything. Medieval mapmakers charted the world as a spiritual biography. On grand works like the Hereford Mappa Mundi, the known continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa are arranged within a perfect circle, a schema reflecting the Christian worldview of the 13th century. But your eye is drawn eastward to the very top of the map, where a perfect circular island is depicted, completely separated from the mainland by a formidable wall and a ring of water. This is the earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden itself, placed at the extreme edge of the world. It is not shown as a sunken land or a city in the sky, but its cartographic isolation gives it a profound sense of suspension. It floats on the parchment, and by extension in the medieval imagination, as a sacred space severed from the fallen world by its own divine geography. The river that flows from it parts into 4 branches, feeding the great rivers of the earth, yet the source remains untouchable, barred to humanity by a fiery sword and a wall of flame. This was not a place one could sail to, for the oceans on the map were filled with monstrous beasts and the east was shrouded in mystery. The Mappa Mundi was less a navigational tool and more a spiritual diagram, a visual sermon. By placing Eden as a detached, walled island at the world's edge, these maps presented the original human home as the ultimate floating sanctuary, a paradise lost not to time but to access. It was a constant, haunting reminder that our point of origin was now a separate, elevated realm, forever present on the map but forever out of reach. What does it say about our longing for home when the only way to map it is to place it behind an impassable wall on the edge of everything? A sleeping leviathan could be mistaken for solid ground, but a bird large enough to blot out the sun presented a different kind of deception. Across the trade routes of the Indian Ocean, sailors shared terrified whispers of the Rock, a raptor of such impossible scale that its wingspan was said to measure thousands of miles. In the tales of 1001 Nights, this was no mere monster, but a force of nature, a creature whose very existence defied the laws of the known world. Its most terrifying trick, however, was one of passive camouflage. After a long flight across the open ocean, a weary rock would settle upon the waves to rest, folding its colossal wings and tucking its head. Its broad, feathery back, often caked with earth and vegetation carried from distant shores, would break the surface of the water. To a ship's lookout, desperate for any sign of land after weeks at sea, this massive, stationary form appeared as nothing less than a lush, uncharted island. The crew, overcome with relief, would steer their vessel toward this promised refuge. They would drop anchor, drag their boats ashore, and set up camp directly on the creature's back. They would light cooking fires, feeling the firm, earthy ground beneath their feet, completely unaware that they were standing on a living creature sleeping just below the surface of the sea. The disaster would begin with a low, deep tremor, a vibration that shook through the very soil. Then the entire island would lurch, heaving upwards as the rock awakened. The fires that had seemed so comforting moments before now became the signal for their doom, startling the giant bird into flight. As it rose into the air with a thunderous beat of its wings, the men, their ships, and everything they had brought ashore would be swept into the abyss or carried high into the sky, prisoners on a living island that had never been an island at all. This story is a masterclass in maritime horror, transforming the simple act of finding land into the prelude to a catastrophe. It speaks to the ultimate vulnerability of the explorer, where the one thing you trust most, the solid earth itself, can betray you in an instant. How many other uncharted islands on ancient maps were not land at all, but the fleeting, fatal resting places of things too large to comprehend? The 19th century unearthed a lost continent not from the earth but from pure imagination. A French-American antiquarian named Augustus Le Plongeon, while studying Mayan ruins in the Yucatan, proposed a radical theory. He claimed to have deciphered ancient texts that spoke of a vast continent called Mu, which had once existed in the Pacific Ocean. Le Plongeon described it as the true cradle of civilization, a land of immense sophistication and sprawling cities, even more ancient than Atlantis itself. According to his dramatic narrative, this entire paradise was destroyed in a single, catastrophic day and night, vanishing into the deep waters of the Pacific. His theory was a masterpiece of creative fiction, woven from misinterpreted inscriptions and a fervent desire to find a single, grand origin for all ancient cultures. The scientific community swiftly and thoroughly dismissed his claims, pointing to a complete lack of geological or archaeological evidence. Yet the idea of Mu proved too alluring to vanish. It captured the public spirit of adventure and mystery, filling the empty spaces on the map of the Pacific with a glorious, sunken world. It drew a direct and powerful parallel to Plato's Atlantis, creating a twin legend, one lost in the Atlantic and the other in the Pacific. This modern myth, born from a scholar's era, permanently enriched the modern mythos of sunken lands, suggesting that humanity's forgotten golden age was not confined to one ocean, but lay submerged beneath them all. Why does the idea of a sunken world in the Pacific feel so strangely familiar, as if we are remembering a dream we never actually had? The search for hidden wisdom transformed an ancient legend into a modern prophecy. In the late 19th century, the Theosophical Society, founded by the enigmatic Helena Blavatsky, took the Buddhist concept of Shambhala and recast it for a Western audience hungry for esoteric truths. Blavatsky and her followers described it not merely as a hidden valley, but as the secret spiritual center of the entire world, a place they called the White Island. This was the heart of a global occult government populated by a brotherhood of ascended masters, beings who had evolved beyond physical form and now guided humanity's spiritual destiny from their secluded realm. The Theosophists visualized this headquarters as an ethereal, luminous city, often placing it in a mysterious, elevated region of the Gobi Desert. Its structures were not built from stone, but from a substance of pure energy and light, giving it the distinct quality of a metropolis that floated just above the sands, untouchable and unseen by ordinary eyes. This reinterpretation was a profound departure from the original Buddhist texts. It shifted Shambhala from a promised land of future kings into an active, hidden academy of superhuman intellects, a celestial command center directing the spiritual evolution of our planet. This powerful, esotericized vision did not remain confined to philosophical circles. It seeped into the very bedrock of 20th century New Age thought, inspiring everything from alternative spiritual communities to the channeling practices where individuals claim to receive messages from these same ascended masters. The theosophical Shambhala became a template, a compelling proof that the ultimate truth was not something to be found within, but a secret knowledge guarded in a floating city, waiting for the chosen few to uncover its location. How does a spiritual ideal become a physical place on a map? And why does that map always seem to lead to a city just beyond our reach? A century ago, a new kind of floating city was born in the pages of a pulp magazine, one that redefined the concept as a place of cosmic horror. The writer H.P. Lovecraft conjured the sunken city of Arlaye, a cyclopean nightmare lying dormant on the ocean floor. This was the prison of the great old one Cthulhu, a being of such immense and alien power that its mere dreams could influence the minds of sensitive individuals across the globe. Arlaye was not built by human hands or even for human comprehension. Lovecraft described its architecture with a deliberately chilling phrase, non-Euclidean geometry. This meant its structures defied the rules of our reality, with angles that were subtly and terrifyingly wrong, walls that curved in impossible ways, and a sprawling layout that seemed to shift and writhe before an observer's eyes. Imagine a city where staircases lead to dead ends in mid-air, where doorways open onto vast, empty skies, and the very stone of its buildings feels unnaturally slick and warm, as if it were alive. This was not a city designed for light and air, but for dimensions and senses beyond our own, and it was not permanently submerged. The most frightening aspect of Arlaye's legend is that it was said to rise. Under the influence of certain stars or through shifts in the cosmic order, the entire blasphemous metropolis would temporarily heave itself up from the deep, breaking the surface of the Pacific with a groan of tortured stone. In these moments, it became the ultimate floating city, a temporary, monstrous island that was a physical impossibility. This temporary ascension made the horror tangible. A ship lost in a remote part of the ocean could stumble upon this newly risen landmass, its crew witnessing the impossible angles and gargantuan scale of a city that should not exist. Lovecraft's genius was to take the ancient human fear of what lies beneath the waves and fuse it with a modern fear of a meaningless, uncaring universe. Arlaye is not a lost human paradise like Atlantis, but a prison for something that would view our entire civilization as insignificant. Its cyclical rising from the deep transformed the romantic dream of a floating city into a chilling portent, a reminder that if such a place ever does break the surface, it may not be a homecoming for humanity, but an awakening of something that wishes we had never existed at all. The human imagination has always built its cities in the sky, but the tools we use to describe them have evolved. In our modern technological age, the ancient archetype of the majestic, inaccessible sky city has found a new vocabulary, not in myths of gods and demons, but in the stark language of unidentified aerial phenomena. For decades, reports have described more than just simple lights in the night. Pilots, military personnel, and civilians have recounted seeing vast, structured craft of impossible geometry, silent triangles the size of football fields, or clusters of lights moving in perfect, intelligent formation. To the modern mythmaker, the UFO enthusiast, these are not mere vehicles. They are glimpsed fragments of something far grander, literal technological floating cities cruising the upper atmosphere or hidden within cloaking fields. The stories told are of motherships so immense they could house entire populations, their silent, hovering presence echoing the celestial fortresses of ancient India or the elusive cloud kingdoms of Indonesia. This is the contemporary incarnation of a timeless dream, where the magical floating island of Hy-Brasil is replaced by a silent black triangle, and the griffin-guarded Golden Plateau becomes a government secret locked away in a desert hangar. The human need for a realm above our own remains undimmed. We have simply traded the language of divine punishment and heroic quests for one of quantum physics and reverse engineering. The vessel changes, but the voyage of the mind is the same. Are we witnessing the birth of a new mythology, one where our ancient dreams are projected onto the unresolved mysteries of our own skies? Science fiction did not invent the floating city, it simply gave it a new engine. The cloud city of Bespin, a glittering metropolis suspended in the gas giant's upper atmosphere, became an instant icon of advanced civilization. Its elegant spires and graceful arches were a stark contrast to the gritty, ground-bound worlds of the Star Wars galaxy, a visual promise of a life free from the mud and struggle of the surface. This was not a city built on a foundation of rock, but on technology, its repulsor-lift engines and Tabana gas mining platforms representing a total mastery over a seemingly uninhabitable environment. Similarly, the predatory traction cities of the Mortal Engines series, vast urban centers mounted on colossal wheels and tracks, evolved into the ultimate expression of this theme, the airborne city of Airhaven, a floating trading post kept aloft by zeppelins and anti-gravity engines. These science fiction visions are direct descendants of ancient myths like Hiranyapura, the golden city of the demons, but with a crucial twist. Where the demons used magic, these future societies use physics. The dream remains identical, a society so advanced it has physically separated itself from the common earth, creating a new stratum of existence in the sky. These stories explore the same age-old questions about power, isolation, and hubris. Does living above the clouds lead to a more enlightened society? Or does it simply create a new aristocracy, literally looking down on those left below? The floating city, whether powered by mystic gems or fusion reactors, endures as the ultimate symbol of humanity's ambition to conquer its environment and the profound social divisions that ambition can create. How long until our own technology makes these fictional skylines a permanent feature of our horizon? These 50 stories are not a random collection, but a chorus singing the same human dream across the centuries. Why does this vision of a city unmoored from the earth resonate so deeply within us? The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung might say it is because the floating city is not just a place, but a powerful archetype, a universal symbol etched into the bedrock of our collective unconscious. It appears in our myths and dreams because it represents something fundamental about our own inner landscape, a symbol of the self. The self, in Jungian terms, is the total, integrated personality, the harmonious union of our conscious and unconscious minds. Picture this: the city, with its ordered streets and central citadel, is a perfect metaphor for a complete and well-organized psyche. Its elevation, its separation from the common ground, symbolizes this state of being psychologically whole, rising above our inner conflicts and primal instincts. It is the ultimate symbol of spiritual aspiration, a visual promise of what we could become if we could only integrate the scattered parts of our being. This is why these cities are so often described as places of perfect peace, wisdom, or immortality. They are not just external paradises, they are maps of an internal one, a vision of the mind in a state of enlightened balance. The floating city also represents consciousness itself, an island of light and order adrift in the vast, dark sea of the unknown unconscious. Its persistent elusiveness, the fact that it can never be permanently found or occupied, is its most telling feature. It is a utopian ideal, always on the horizon, forever inspiring us to journey further, to seek deeper, both in the world and within ourselves. We are not just searching for a lost continent, we are searching for a lost part of our own potential. The power of this archetype lies in its dual nature. It is a real place in stories and a spiritual destination in the soul. Every time an explorer sets sail for Hy-Brasil or a pilgrim seeks Shambhala, they are acting out this profound inner quest. The city floats because wholeness always feels just beyond our grasp, a beautiful, shimmering goal that guides our entire journey through life. That ancient dream of a city unmoored from the earth is no longer confined to myth. Today, the floating city is re-emerging as a blueprint for our survival. As sea levels rise and coastal megacities face overcrowding, architects and engineers are turning to the very waters that once swallowed legendary kingdoms. The most prominent of these ventures is Oceanics, a concept for a resilient, sustainable floating community that has garnered serious attention from the United Nations. Imagine not a single structure, but a vast, interconnected archipelago of hexagonal platforms, each one a neighborhood anchored securely to the seabed. These are not static islands, but modular, expanding ecosystems designed to withstand hurricanes and floods. They are envisioned as self-sufficient worlds, powered entirely by solar and wind, growing their own food through aquaponics and harvesting fresh water from the air and the sea. This is not a speculative fantasy, but a pragmatic, funded proposal to house thousands of people in harmony with the ocean, a direct response to the existential threats of our time. This vision represents the ultimate fusion of our oldest dreams with our newest technologies. The concentric rings of Atlantis find their echo in the hexagons of Oceanics. The divine engineering of Hiranyapura is reborn in the form of advanced marine engineering and carbon-neutral power systems. The elusive, shifting nature of Hy-Brasil is transformed into a planned, adaptable community designed to evolve with the changing climate. For millennia, we told stories of cities that floated to escape the wrath of gods or to achieve spiritual purity. Now, we are building them to escape the consequences of our own actions and to achieve ecological balance. The dream has not changed, only its purpose. We are still seeking refuge on the water, but this time we are not fleeing a punishment from the heavens. We are building a life raft for our shared future. 50 floating cities have drifted through our collective memory, from the sunken rings of Atlantis to the cloud-piercing spires of science fiction. This entire journey reveals a profound and persistent pattern in the human spirit. We are forever drawn to the idea of a place just beyond our reach, a sanctuary floating on the horizon that promises everything we lack. These legends are woven from the same three threads: a fascination with the inaccessible, a deep desire for utopia, and a powerful blend of fear and wonder toward the vast unknown. Whether it is a city beneath the waves or a fortress in the sky, each story is a mirror reflecting our own aspirations and anxieties. They ask us what we value, what we fear losing, and what we dream of becoming. So, what do you think? Are these stories merely myths, or could they be distorted memories of real events, echoes of lost lands, or incredible achievements swallowed by time? Which floating city legend captivates you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into history's greatest mysteries. Perhaps the most powerful truth hidden within all these stories is that we are not really searching for a place at all. We are chasing an idea, a vision of what humanity could be if freed from its earthly constraints. The perfect society, a life in harmony with the elements, a direct line to the divine. These are the yearnings that give shape to cities of cloud and sea. These legends endure because they are not about geography. They are about the soul's deepest ambitions. They represent our collective desire to build something that transcends the mud and struggle of ordinary existence, to create a refuge from famine, war, and decay. Every floating city is a blueprint for a better world, a testament to our refusal to accept the world as it is. This is why they resonate just as powerfully with the modern engineer designing a sustainable ocean community as they did with the ancient scribe describing a golden fortress in the sky. The vessel changes, but the voyage remains the same. We are all, in our own way, trying to find our way back to that shimmering city on the horizon, a place that has never existed on any map but has